Katherine Blackwell clutched the wooden cross hanging from her neck as she stared at the third fresh grave she'd dug in the past week. The Nebraska prairie wind whipped mercilessly across the homestead, carrying dust that stung her eyes, though she couldn't tell anymore what was dust and what were tears. 18 years old and completely alone, with nothing but the silent log cabin behind her and the endless horizon ahead. The sickness had taken everything, first Pa with his booming laugh, then little Ellie with her gap-toothed smile, and finally Ma, who'd fought the hardest before succumbing just yesterday. The April sun was setting, painting the sky in cruel beauty that Katherine couldn't bring herself to appreciate. Her hands were raw from the shovel, her dark hair tangled and unkempt beneath her bonnet. The year was 1876, and she had exactly $3.42 to her name, a dwindling food supply, and no idea what tomorrow might bring. She'd written to her mother's cousin in St. Louis 2 weeks ago when Pa first fell ill, but no reply had come. Perhaps it never would. She hadn't eaten since morning, but hunger felt distant and unimportant. Katherine knelt beside her mother's grave, wanting to pray but finding no words. The homestead that had once felt full of promise now seemed like a prison of memories. She'd have to leave, but where would she go? The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Katherine stood quickly, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. A lone rider approached from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. Her father's rifle was in the cabin, but she doubted she had the strength to use it even if she could reach it in time. The rider slowed as he approached the graves, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Not young, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes, she noticed as he drew closer, were a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Forgive the intrusion. Saw the smoke from your chimney and thought to check if all was well." His gaze moved to the fresh graves, understanding dawning on his face. "Though I can see it's not." Katherine straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear as broken as she felt. "The sickness took them. First Pa, then my sister, then Ma just yesterday." The man's face softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that. Quincy Reed is my name. I ranch about 5 miles west of here." He hesitated. "Are you all alone now, miss?" The kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure. Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "And how long has it been since you've eaten?" he asked perceptively. "I'm fine," she lied. Quincy Reed studied her for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package. "At least take this. Some bread and jerky. Not much, but it'll hold you over." Katherine wanted to refuse out of pride, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. She accepted the package with murmured thanks. "Miss," he prompted. "Katherine Blackwell," she supplied. "Miss Blackwell," he said carefully, replacing his hat. "I don't mean to overstep, but it isn't safe for a young woman alone out here. Do you have family nearby, somewhere you can go?" She shook her head, hating the helplessness that washed over her. "I wrote to my mother's cousin in St. Louis, but I've had no reply." Quincy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Miss Blackwell, I don't know what your plans might be, but there's room at my table should you need a proper meal and some time to consider your options." Katherine stared at him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer, but found only sincere concern. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, runs the household," he added, perhaps sensing her hesitation. "She's a good woman, strict as they come. You'd be under her watch, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you'd be treated with nothing but respect. Why would you help a stranger?" Katherine asked, suspicion warring with desperate need. Quincy's gaze returned to the fresh graves. "Because out here, we're all one bad season away from needing help ourselves. Your Pa would have done the same for any of my hands if the situation were reversed." The truth of his words resonated with her. Her father had always been quick to offer assistance to travelers and neighbors alike. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Quincy nodded. "Of course. I'll be back this way tomorrow afternoon." If you decide to accept, I'll help you gather whatever you wish to bring." He tipped his hat. "And if you choose to make other arrangements, I respect that too. Either way, please eat something tonight." As he turned his horse to leave, Katherine called out, "Mr. Reed." He looked back. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once more, then rode away, leaving Katherine standing between the graves and the darkening sky, the package of food clutched in her hands, and the first glimmer of possibility she'd felt in days. That night, Katherine sat at the rough-hewn table where her family had shared countless meals. The bread and jerky Quincy Reed had given her tasted better than anything she could remember. As she ate, she considered her options. She could try to run the homestead alone, but spring planting was upon them, and she lacked the strength to work the fields properly. Even if she could manage somehow, the isolation would be unbearable. She could sell what little they had and try to make it to St. Louis, but the journey was dangerous for a woman alone, and she had no guarantee of welcome at the end. Or she could accept Mr. Reed's offer, at least temporarily. It would give her time to think, to grieve, to plan her next steps. Something about the rancher's straightforward manner had inspired trust, despite her natural caution. Katherine spent the night going through her family's belongings, selecting the few precious items she couldn't bear to leave behind: her mother's Bible and cameo brooch, her father's pocket watch, little Ellie's rag doll. She packed her clothes and the family photographs, then lay down on her bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. By morning, her decision was made. If Mr. Reed returned as promised, she would go with him. She would take the opportunity he offered while she had the chance. Katherine spent the day cleaning the cabin and preparing it to be left empty. She visited the graves one last time, promising her family she wouldn't forget them. Then she sat on the porch and waited. True to his word, Quincy Reed appeared on the horizon shortly after midday. This time, he drove a wagon rather than riding horseback. Katherine watched his approach with a mixture of trepidation and relief. He stopped the wagon and climbed down, approaching with the same respectful demeanor as before. "Afternoon, Miss Blackwell." "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged. "I've decided to accept your offer if it still stands." A small smile crossed his features. "It does. Have you gathered your things?" She nodded toward the two small trunks and bag by the door. "That's all I'm bringing." "Very well, I'll load them up." He hesitated. "Have you thought about the homestead? Will you be coming back?" Katherine looked at the cabin that had been her home for the past 5 years. "I don't know yet. I can't imagine anyone else living here, but I can't imagine staying either." "No need to decide now," Quincy said gently. "We can secure it properly, and it'll be waiting if you choose to return." With efficient movements, he loaded her belongings into the wagon, then helped her board, treating her with the careful courtesy one might show a piece of fine china. Katherine sat stiffly beside him as he took up the reins, her heart pounding with anxiety and uncertainty. As the wagon pulled away, she looked back at the homestead, at the 3 graves beneath the cottonwood tree, at the cabin where her family had loved and lived and died. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. "It's about an hour's ride," Quincy said, breaking the silence. "Reed Ranch isn't the biggest in the territory, but we do all right. 20 hands during busy seasons, 12 year-round. Good men, mostly. What do you raise?" Katherine asked, grateful for the neutral topic. "Cattle primarily, some horses, a bit of everything else for our own needs." As the wagon rolled across the prairie, Quincy pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. His voice was steady and calming, asking nothing of her but occasional attention. Katherine found herself gradually relaxing in his presence. "There it is," he said eventually, gesturing toward the horizon where buildings had come into view. "Home." Reed Ranch was considerably larger than Katherine had imagined. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a bunkhouse, barn, cookhouse, and what looked like a smithy. Corrals and fenced pastures stretched beyond, dotted with cattle. As they approached, a gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. When the wagon pulled up to the house, she came down the steps with brisk efficiency. "Mrs. Winters," Quincy said by way of introduction, "this is Miss Katherine Blackwell. She's lost her family to sickness and will be staying with us for a time." Mrs. Winters's stern face softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, child. Mr. Reed sent word this morning that you might be joining us. I've prepared the east bedroom for you." "Thank you," Katherine said, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "Help Miss Blackwell with her things, would you?" Quincy asked Mrs. Winters. "I need to check on a situation in the north pasture. I'll be back for supper." With that, he tipped his hat to Katherine and strode toward the barn, leaving her in Mrs. Winters's capable hands. "Come along then," the older woman said, not unkindly. "You look like you could use a bath and a proper meal in that order." Katherine followed Mrs. Winters into the house, stepping into a world entirely different from the one she'd left behind. The main room was spacious and well-appointed, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and actual paintings on the walls. A central staircase led to the upper floor. "Mr. Reed keeps a good house," Mrs. Winters said, noting Katherine's wide-eyed assessment. "His late wife had fine taste, God rest her soul." His wife, Katherine hadn't considered that Mr. Reed might be married. "Passed 4 years ago, childbirth, the baby too," Mrs. Winters said matter-of-factly. "This way?" Katherine followed her up the stairs, processing this new information. The east bedroom turned out to be a pleasant chamber with a proper bed, washstand, wardrobe, and a window overlooking the rolling prairie. Baths already drawn in the washroom down the hall, Mrs. Winters informed her. "Take your time, supper's at 6, I'll have one of the boys bring up your trunks." Left alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The events of the past week, the deaths, the burial, the decision to leave her home crashed over her. For the first time since her mother took ill, she allowed herself to cry properly, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollow but somehow cleaner, as if some of the grief had been washed away. Katherine went to the washroom and found a steaming bath waiting. She removed her dusty clothes and sank into the hot water, feeling the tension begin to leave her body. After bathing and changing into her cleanest dress, Katherine made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of dinner preparations. She found Mrs. Winters in a spacious kitchen, directing a young girl in the final preparations for the meal. "Ah, there you are, Mrs. Winters said approvingly. "You look more the thing now. This is Betsy, she helps in the kitchen and with the housework." Betsy, who couldn't have been more than 15, bobbed a quick curtsy. Mr. Reed takes his meals in the dining room," Mrs. Winters continued. "The hands eat at the cookhouse, except for Mr. Hollister, the foreman, who sometimes joins the main table. You'll take your meals with Mr. Reed as befits a guest." Katherine nodded, though the prospect of dining alone with Quincy Reed made her nervous. "Is there anything I can help with, Mrs. Winters looked surprised, then pleased. "Not tonight, you rest. Tomorrow we can discuss how you might occupy your time here." The sound of the front door opening announced Quincy's return. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, having removed his hat and coat. His presence seemed to fill the room. "Miss Blackwell," he greeted her. "I trust Mrs. Winters has made you comfortable?" "Yes, thank you, Mr. Reed." "Good, shall we?" He gestured toward the dining room. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the ranch's winter stores. Quincy led a brief grace, then served Katherine before himself. "I hope the room suits you," he said as they began to eat. "It's lovely," Katherine assured him. "Far grander than I'm accustomed to." A small smile touched his lips. "It's a comfortable house, too big for just me, truth be told." They ate in silence for a few moments before Quincy spoke again. "Miss Blackwell, I want to be clear about your situation here. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, whether that's days, weeks, or longer. There's no obligation on your part." "That's very generous," Katherine said carefully. But I can't accept charity indefinitely. I'd like to earn my keep somehow. Quincy considered this. Mrs. Winters could use help with the household, I'm sure, and if you have other skills you'd like to put to use, we can discuss that too. I can cook, clean, so, Katherine offered. I helped my father with the farm accounts. I taught my sister her letters. Education, then, Quincy nodded. We have several families among the hands. Their children get precious little schooling out here. That might be something to consider. The conversation continued, touching on practical matters of ranch life and Katherine's immediate needs. Quincy was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance that Katherine found both reassuring and a little disappointing, though she couldn't have explained why. After dinner, he excused himself to attend to ranch business, leaving Katherine to help Mrs. Winters clear the table despite the housekeeper's protests. Mr. Reed seems a good man, Katherine ventured as they worked in the kitchen. Mrs. Winters nodded firmly. One of the best. Fair employer, generous neighbor, been through his share of hardship, but it never turned him mean like it does some men. You mentioned his wife. Mrs. Winters's face softened momentarily. Miss Elizabeth, a lovely woman, they were devoted to each other. Her passing nearly destroyed him. She fixed Katherine with a stern look. He's only now coming back to himself. I won't see him hurt again. Katherine felt her cheeks flush. I assure you, Mrs. Winters, I have no designs on Mr. Reed. I'm merely grateful for his kindness. The older woman's expression relaxed slightly. Of course. Forgive an old woman's protective nature. Mr. Reed is like a son to me. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Katherine tried to process everything that had happened. 1 week ago, her family had been whole. Now they were gone, and she was sleeping under a stranger's roof, dependent on his charity. The world had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her unmoored and adrift. Yet despite everything, as she drifted towards sleep, Katherine felt something she hadn't expected, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps tomorrow might be better than today. The following weeks established a routine that gave Katherine's life a much-needed structure. She rose early, helped Mrs. Winters with breakfast preparations, then spent the morning assisting with household tasks. In the afternoons, she often walked the grounds, gradually expanding her knowledge of the ranch. Evenings were spent at dinner with Quincy, followed by quiet hours reading from his surprisingly extensive library or helping Mrs. Winters with mending. Katherine found unexpected comfort in the rhythm of ranch life. The constant activity provided distraction from her grief, which, while still profound, became more manageable with each passing day. She began to notice details she'd been too numb to register initially: the way the spring sunlight filtered through the cottonwood trees, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the ranch hands' good-natured banter as they went about their work. Quincy himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly kind and attentive during their evening meals, asking about her day and occasionally sharing stories about the ranch or its history. Yet he maintained a careful distance, never intruding on her privacy or making her feel uncomfortable with undue attention. Katherine found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, observing the confident way he gave instructions to his men, the gentle manner he used with the horses, the rare but transformative smile that sometimes brightened his features when something amused him. Despite Mrs. Winters's warning, or perhaps because of it, Katherine found herself increasingly curious about the man who had offered her shelter when she needed it most. One afternoon in early May, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Katherine was returning from a walk when she noticed activity around the corral nearest the house. Several ranch hands were gathered, watching as Quincy worked with a magnificent chestnut stallion. The animal was clearly wild, resisting the rope with violent jerks and snorts of defiance. Katherine paused to watch, impressed by Quincy's patience. He never yanked the rope or showed frustration, just maintained steady pressure, releasing it the moment the horse took even a small step in the right direction. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the stallion began to respond, its resistance becoming less dramatic with each passing minute. "He's got away with the difficult ones," said a voice beside her. Katherine turned to find an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes watching the scene. She recognized him as Mr. Hollister, the ranch foreman. "The horse or the men?" she asked with a small smile. Hollister chuckled. "Both, Miss Blackwell. Both. That's Firecracker he's working with now, most wild-tempered yearling we've seen in ages. Any other rancher would have given up on him already, but Mr. Reed sees something worth saving there." Katherine watched as Quincy finally approached the stallion, speaking in low tones she couldn't hear. The horse's ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring, but it stood its ground as Quincy slowly raised a hand to its neck. "He's good at seeing the potential in things others might discard," Hollister continued with a meaningful glance at Katherine. She flushed, understanding his implication. "I'm grateful for Mr. Reed's kindness," she said carefully. "I don't know what would have become of me otherwise." Hollister nodded. "He's a good man who's seen his share of hard times, lost his parents young, built this place up from nearly nothing, then lost his wife just when things were finally going well." He sighed. "Life's dealt him some tough hands, but he never complains, just keeps going." In the corral, Quincy was now stroking the chestnut's neck, the horse trembling but accepting his touch. The transformation seemed almost magical to Katherine. "Anyway," Hollister said, tipping his hat, "best get back to work. Good day to you, Miss Blackwell." As the foreman walked away, Katherine continued watching Quincy with the horse. There was something compelling about his patience, his quiet confidence. When he finally looked up and noticed her, a smile spread across his face, warmer and more open than any she'd seen from him before. He raised a hand in greeting, and Katherine found herself smiling back, a strange flutter in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. That evening at dinner, Katherine mentioned what she'd witnessed. "Mr. Hollister says that horse has a difficult temperament," she said as Quincy passed her the potatoes. "But you seem to know exactly how to approach him." Quincy's expression grew thoughtful. "Firecracker's not mean-spirited, just scared and confused. Most difficult creatures are, in my experience." "How did you learn to handle them?" "Trial and error, mostly," he admitted. "And watching men who were better at it than me. My father was good with horses, though he didn't live long enough to teach me everything." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to learn? About horses, I mean." Katherine looked up, surprised by the offer. "I would actually. We only had 2 workhorses on our homestead and they were old and gentle. I've never learned to ride properly." "Then we'll remedy that," Quincy said decisively. "If you're willing, we can start tomorrow." "I have a mare named Willow who'd be perfect for a beginner." The prospect of learning something new, of having a purpose beyond household chores, filled Katherine with unexpected excitement. "I'd like that very much." The next afternoon found Katherine in the smaller corral, face to face with a dappled gray mare whose gentle eyes seemed to regard her with patient amusement. Quincy stood nearby, instructing her on how to approach the horse. "Move slowly but confidently," he explained. "Let her see your hands. Horses can sense fear or uncertainty, so try to stay calm." Katherine followed his instructions, her heart racing despite her efforts to appear composed. When she finally placed her hand on Willow's neck, feeling the warm, solid presence of the animal, a smile spread across her face. "She's beautiful," Katherine murmured. "She is," Quincy agreed, watching them with approval. "Now let's teach you how to saddle her." The lesson progressed with Quincy demonstrating each step, then guiding Katherine's hands when necessary. His touch was always brief and professional, yet Katherine found herself intensely aware of his proximity, of the strength in his hands as they adjusted her grip on the reins. "Now for the mounting," Quincy said once Willow was properly saddled. "Put your left foot in the stirrup, hold the reins and the pommel, and swing your right leg over." Katherine attempted to follow his instructions, but found herself stuck halfway, unable to complete the movement gracefully. Before she could stumble, Quincy's hands were at her waist, lifting her securely into the saddle. "There you go," he said, his voice a touch deeper than before. He quickly stepped back once she was settled, as if realizing the intimacy of the contact. Now sit up straight, heels down, reins held loosely. For the next hour, Quincy led Willow around the corral while Katherine adjusted to the feeling of being on horseback. By the end of the lesson, she had progressed to controlling the mare's movements herself, albeit at a very slow walk. "You're a natural," Quincy told her as he helped her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Quickly, he released her and stepped back. "Thank you for teaching me," Katherine said, trying to ignore the warmth in her cheeks. "It's my pleasure," Quincy replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Same time tomorrow," Katherine nodded, already looking forward to it. As she walked back to the house, she found herself thinking not just about the riding lesson, but about the man who had taught it. The careful way he explained things, the patience in his instructions, the brief moments when his professional demeanor slipped to reveal something warmer underneath. The riding lessons became a daily fixture, a bright spot that Katherine anticipated each morning. Under Quincy's tutelage, she progressed quickly, gaining confidence in the saddle and developing a genuine affection for Willow. After 2 weeks, she was ready for her first ride beyond the confines of the corral. "We'll just go as far as the creek and back," Quincy assured her as they set out one clear morning in late May. "Nice and easy." Katherine nodded, nervous but excited. Quincy rode beside her on a powerful black gelding named Thunder, occasionally offering guidance but mostly allowing her to find her own rhythm. The prairie stretched around them, vibrant with late spring growth, wildflowers dotting the landscape with splashes of color. "It's beautiful," Katherine said as they paused by the creek, allowing the horses to drink. "I never saw the land this way from the homestead. Everything looks different from horseback." Quincy smiled, watching her rather than the scenery. "It does, gives you a new perspective." Katherine dismounted carefully, stretching her legs. Quincy did the same, leading both horses to a shady spot beneath a cottonwood tree and securing their reins. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said as they sat on a fallen log near the water's edge. "The ranch's accounts need organizing, and Mrs. Winters mentioned you have experience with bookkeeping." Katherine nodded. "My father taught me. Our homestead was small, but he believed in keeping proper records. Would you be willing to help? It would be paid work, of course." The offer caught Katherine by surprise. "You don't need to pay me. I'm already indebted to you for you're not indebted to me," Quincy interrupted firmly. "You've been earning your keep with Mrs. Winters and then some. This would be different regular work with fair compensation." The idea appealed to Katherine more than she wanted to admit. Having her own income, even a small one, would restore some of the independence she'd lost. "I'd be happy to help," she said finally. "Thank you for the opportunity." Quincy nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. We can start tomorrow, if that suits you." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the play of sunlight on the water. Katherine found herself studying Quincy's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that hinted at a capacity for laughter not often indulged. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. Quincy turned to her, his expression open. "Of course, Mrs. Winters mentioned your wife. I'm sorry for your loss." It wasn't quite a question, but Quincy seemed to understand what she was asking. He looked back at the creek, his face softening with memory. "Elizabeth," he said quietly. "We were married 6 years. She was everything I never knew I needed. Smart, kind, stubborn as the day is long." A small smile touched his lips. "She's the one who made this house a home, planted the garden, hung the curtains, filled the place with books and music." Katherine listened, touched by the evident love in his voice. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day," he admitted, "but less sharply now than before. Time doesn't heal all wounds, like they say, but it teaches you how to carry them." He glanced at Katherine. "You understand that, I think," she nodded, thinking of her own family. The grief was still fresh, but already changing shape, becoming something she could bear. "Does it get easier?" she asked softly. Quincy considered this. Different, not easier. You start to remember the good things without the pain overwhelming you. You find new joys eventually. But you never forget. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt a connection form between them, a shared understanding of loss that needed no further words. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the sounds of the creek and the distant call of meadowlarks the only interruption. Finally, Quincy cleared his throat and stood. "We should head back. Mrs. Winters will have dinner waiting." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, however, Quincy spoke again. "Thank you for asking about Elizabeth," he said. Most people avoid the subject, thinking it will cause pain, but sometimes speaking of those we've lost keeps them with us in a way. Katherine understood exactly what he meant. "Then perhaps someday I'll tell you about my family," she offered. "I'd like them to be remembered too." Quincy's smile was warm and genuine. "I'd like that very much, Katherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice stayed with her long after they had returned to the ranch and gone their separate ways for the evening. The next morning, Katherine reported to Quincy's study after breakfast to begin work on the ranch accounts. The room reflected its owner, practical and orderly, yet with unexpected touches of refinement. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on agriculture and animal husbandry, but also literature, history, and philosophy. A large desk dominated the space, covered with papers and ledgers. "I'm afraid it's a bit of a mess," Quincy said apologetically. "I've been meaning to get to it for months." Katherine surveyed the chaos with a critical eye. "It's nothing that can't be organized. Where would you like me to start?" For the next several hours, Katherine immersed herself in the work, sorting receipts, updating ledgers, and creating a system that would be easier to maintain going forward. Quincy worked alongside her, answering questions and providing context when needed. The easy rhythm of their collaboration felt natural, as if they'd been working together for years rather than hours. When Mrs. Winters brought them lunch on a tray, she raised an eyebrow at the transformation of the desk, which was now neatly organized with stacks of categorized documents. "It's a miracle," she declared. "I've been telling Mr. Reed for months that this room was a disgrace." Quincy grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Miss Blackwell has hidden talents, it seems." "Hardly hidden," Katherine protested, "just ordinary skills put to use." "There's nothing ordinary about you, Miss Blackwell," Quincy said, his tone light but his eyes serious. Their gazes held for a moment before Mrs. Winters cleared her throat pointedly. "Eat while it's hot," she instructed, leaving them to their meal. As May gave way to June, Katherine settled more deeply into life at Reed Ranch. The bookkeeping became a regular part of her routine, along with the riding lessons, which had progressed to longer excursions around the ranch property. She also began helping in the vegetable garden, which had fallen into neglect since Elizabeth Reed's death. One particularly warm afternoon, Katherine was on her knees in the garden, pulling weeds and planning where to plant the late summer vegetables, when a shadow fell across her work. "You've made a difference here," Quincy said, looking around at the much-improved garden. "Elizabeth would be pleased." Katherine sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "I hope so. It's satisfying work seeing things grow." Quincy crouched beside her, examining the young tomato plants she'd put in the week before. "They're thriving under your care. Plants are easier than people," Katherine said with a small smile. "They just need the basics: good soil, water, sunlight. People aren't so different," Quincy observed. "Food, shelter, purpose, connection. The essentials of life are simple. It's we who complicate things." Katherine considered this. "Perhaps, but I think people need more than just the basics to truly thrive. They need beauty, learning, challenge." "And love?" Quincy asked, his voice low. Katherine met his gaze, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, love most of all, I suppose." Something shifted in Quincy's expression, a softening, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. He stood, extending a hand to help her up. "I came to invite you to a gathering." The Hands and their families are having a picnic by the creek this Sunday after church. Sort of a tradition to mark the beginning of summer. I'd be honored if you'd attend. Katherine accepted his hand and rose to her feet, acutely aware of the strength in his grip and the warmth of his skin against hers. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you for including me." Quincy held her hand a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "You're part of the ranch now, Katherine. Of course you'd be included." Part of the ranch. The words filled her with a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude, belonging, and a wistful awareness that her position here was temporary, dependent on Quincy's continued goodwill. Yet looking at him now, seeing the warmth in his blue eyes, Katherine couldn't help but wonder if perhaps she'd found not just a temporary refuge but something more lasting. Sunday dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the planned picnic. Katherine attended the small church in the nearby town with Quincy, Mrs. Winters, and several of the ranch families. It was her first visit to town since arriving at the ranch, and she found herself the object of curious but mostly friendly attention from the local residents. "Don't mind the staring," Mrs. Winters muttered as they took their seats in the simple wooden church. "Small towns run on gossip, and you're the most interesting thing to happen around here in months." Katherine smiled wryly. A woman with no family or prospects, dependent on Mr. Reed's charity. "I imagine that has set tongues wagging." Mrs. Winters sniffed disapprovingly. "People will talk regardless of what you do, best to ignore it and live as you see fit." The service was brief but heartfelt. The pastor's message focused on community and supporting one another through hardship. Katherine found herself moved by the simplicity of the congregation's faith and the evident bonds between the families present. After church, they returned to the ranch and then proceeded to the creek for the picnic. The spot was the same one where Katherine and Quincy had paused during their ride, but now it was transformed by the presence of blankets spread on the grass, tables laden with food, and the sounds of children playing. Katherine helped Mrs. Winters and the other women set out the meal while the men organized games for the children. She found herself enjoying the sense of community, the easy conversation, and the way everyone seemed to accept her presence without question. As the afternoon progressed, Katherine noticed a young boy sitting alone by the creek, apart from the other children. He was perhaps 8 or 9, thin and serious-looking, watching the water with intense concentration. Curious, Katherine approached him. "Hello there, may I join you?" The boy looked up, startled, then nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam," Katherine settled beside him on the grassy bank. "I'm Katherine Blackwell." "I know," the boy said. "You're staying at Mr. Reed's house. I'm James Hollister. My pa is the foreman." "Ah, Mr. Hollister's son." "It's nice to meet you, James. What are you watching in the creek?" James pointed to the water. "Fish. There's a big one under that rock. I've been trying to spot him again." Katherine leaned forward, following his gaze. "Do you like fishing?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Pa takes me sometimes when he's not too busy. I caught a trout this big last month." He held his hands about a foot apart. "That's impressive," Katherine said, smiling at his evident pride. "Do you like to read about fish too?" James looked down, suddenly shy. "I don't read so good." "Pa tries to teach me, but he's busy and I'm slow at learning." "Reading can be difficult," Katherine agreed. "I taught my younger sister, and sometimes we had to try many different approaches before finding what worked for her." The boy looked up hopefully. "You're a teacher." "Not officially," Katherine admitted, "but I enjoy teaching. Would you like some help with your reading?" James considered this, his young face serious. "Would I have to do it in front of the other kids? They already think I'm stupid." Katherine's heart went out to him. "You're certainly not stupid, James, and no, we could work together privately. Perhaps a few afternoons a week if your father agrees." "Really?" The boy's face lit up with genuine hope. "Really," Katherine confirmed. "We'll speak to your father about it today." Their conversation was interrupted by Quincy, who approached with 2 plates of food. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, handing one to Katherine and the other to James. "Having a good talk," James nodded. "Miss Blackwell says she might teach me reading if Pa agrees." Quincy's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked at Katherine. "Is that so? If it's not overstepping," Katherine said, suddenly uncertain. "I thought perhaps a few of the children might benefit from some regular lessons." A slow smile spread across Quincy's face. "It's a fine idea. We've talked about hiring a teacher before, but it's hard to find someone willing to come this far from town." He ruffled James's hair. "And this young man deserves the best education we can provide." James beamed at the praise, then spotted something in the creek. "There he is, the big fish." He scrambled to his feet. "I'm going to tell Pa." And with that he was off, running toward where the adults were gathered. Quincy sat down in the spot James had vacated. "Teaching, hum? You continue to surprise me, Katherine Blackwell." Katherine felt a flush of pleasure at his approval. "It's something I enjoy, and it would give me a purpose beyond the household and accounts." "You don't need to justify wanting to be useful," Quincy said gently. "It's a generous offer, and one I suspect will be eagerly accepted by more families than just the Hollisters." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the play of sunlight on the water. Katherine was acutely aware of Quincy, beside her the subtle scent of leather and soap that always seemed to surround him, the controlled strength in his movements, the occasional brush of his arm against hers that sent an unexpected thrill through her body. "I spoke with Mr. Hollister about your homestead," Quincy said eventually. "He and a couple of the hands rode out there yesterday to check on things." Katherine turned to him, surprised. "You didn't mention they were going." "I didn't want to raise the subject unless there was something to report," Quincy explained. "Everything is secure. They repaired a loose shutter and checked that the root cellar was properly closed. The graves—" He hesitated. "Yes," Katherine prompted. "Hollister said wildflowers have started growing on them. He thought you might like to know that." The image brought unexpected tears to Katherine's eyes. "Thank you for telling me, and for sending them to check." Quincy nodded, his expression gentle. "Would you like to visit? We could ride out there next week if you feel ready." Katherine considered the offer. The thought of seeing the homestead again filled her with both dread and longing. "I think I would like that," she said finally. "Not to stay, but just to see it again, to say a proper goodbye, perhaps." Quincy reached out and briefly covered her hand with his. "Then we'll go." "Whenever you're ready." The simple gesture of comfort, the understanding in his eyes, and the easy way he included her in his plans all combined to create a feeling Katherine had almost forgotten the sense of being truly cared for. It was both wonderful and terrifying, this growing attachment to a man she'd known for such a short time. As the picnic continued around them, with children laughing and adults sharing stories, Katherine found herself wondering about the future. For the first time since the sickness had taken her family, she was beginning to imagine possibilities beyond mere survival possibilities that increasingly included the quiet, thoughtful man beside her. The following week brought Katherine's first formal teaching session. Word had spread quickly after the picnic, and rather than just James Hollister, she found herself with 5 students ranging in age from 6 to 12. Quincy had offered the use of a small, unused building near the main house, which had once served as an office for the previous ranch owner. With Mrs. Winters's help, Katherine cleaned the space and arranged it with a table, chairs, and a blackboard Quincy found in the attic. She assessed each child's abilities and created individual lesson plans, drawing on her experience teaching her sister and the limited resources available. Quincy observed her first session from the doorway, his presence both reassuring and slightly nerve-wracking. The children were initially shy but quickly warmed to Katherine's patient approach. By the end of the 2-hour lesson, even James was participating enthusiastically. "You have a gift," Quincy told her afterward as they walked back to the main house. "Those children were hanging on your every word." Katherine smiled, pleased by his praise. "They're eager to learn. That makes teaching a joy rather than a task." Still, not everyone has the patience or the ability to explain things clearly. "You make it look effortless." "Hardly effortless," Katherine admitted, "but satisfying. I've missed having purpose since." She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss momentarily sharpening. Quincy nodded, understanding without need for explanation. Purpose helps, keeps you moving forward when grief might otherwise root you in place. Is that how it was for you? After Elizabeth, the question was bold, perhaps too personal, but Quincy didn't seem to mind. Yes and no. The ranch provided purpose. Animals need tending, crops need harvesting, men need paying regardless of your personal sorrows. But for a long time it was just motion without meaning. He glanced at her. That's changed recently. The implication in his words, the warmth in his gaze, sent a flutter through Catherine's chest. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by one of the ranch hands calling for Quincy's attention regarding an issue with the cattle. "We'll ride to your homestead tomorrow if the weather holds," Quincy said as he prepared to leave. "Meet me at the stables after breakfast," Katherine nodded, watching him stride away with mixed emotions. Their conversation had shifted something between them, acknowledged an attraction that had been building for weeks. Yet uncertainty remained about her place in his life, about whether the feelings growing between them were genuine or merely the product of proximity and shared understanding of loss. That night, unable to sleep, Katherine stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit prairie. The homestead visit loomed in her mind, a necessary confrontation with her past before she could fully embrace whatever future might be possible here at Reed Ranch. The prospect filled her with both dread and a strange sense of anticipation, as if tomorrow might mark a turning point in more ways than one. Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for the ride to the homestead. Katherine dressed with care in her riding skirt and a clean blouse, her dark hair braided and pinned beneath a practical hat. She packed a small bundle with food Mrs. Winters had prepared and a few flowers from the garden to place on the graves. Quincy was waiting at the stables when she arrived, Willow and Thunder already saddled and ready. He wore his usual practical attire, sturdy trousers, a blue shirt that matched his eyes, and a weathered leather vest. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing the strong lines of his face. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Ready for the journey?" Katherine nodded, though her stomach was tight with nervous anticipation. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ride would take most of the morning, Quincy explained as they set out. He had chosen a route that would be easy for Katherine, still a novice rider despite her progress. They traveled at a leisurely pace, the horses walking side by side across the rolling prairie, which was now lush with early summer growth. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on the children's lessons, ranch matters, and books they had both read. Katherine found herself relaxing as the miles passed, her anxiety about the homestead visit temporarily forgotten in the pleasure of Quincy's company. When they stopped to rest the horses by a small pond, Quincy surprised her by producing a book of poetry from his saddlebag. "Elizabeth's favorite," he explained, handing it to Katherine. "Tennyson. I thought you might enjoy it." Katherine accepted the volume, touched by the gesture and what it represented, Quincy sharing something of his late wife with her. "Thank you. I'd be honored to read it." She marked her favorite passages, Quincy said, watching as Katherine carefully opened the book. "Sometimes I read them and can almost hear her voice." Katherine turned the pages gently, noting the pencil marks beside certain stanzas, the occasional note in a delicate hand in the margins. She must have been a thoughtful reader. She was, Quincy agreed, thoughtful in everything. "You remind me of her sometimes, not in appearance but in spirit. The way you consider things carefully before speaking, the kindness you show to everyone, regardless of station." The comparison startled Katherine. "I'm honored that you would see any similarity." Quincy's gaze was steady. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, it's just, I thought I would never again meet someone who made me feel alive, present in my own life rather than just moving through it." He looked away across the prairie. "I was wrong." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Katherine's heart raced as she searched for a response that would acknowledge what he was saying without presuming too much. "I understand," she said finally. When I lost my family, I thought nothing would ever matter again. That I would simply exist, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. She met his gaze. Being at the ranch, having purpose again, it's helped me remember that life continues, that joy is still possible. And is that all it is? Quincy asked quietly. The ranch, the purpose. Katherine took a deep breath. No, she admitted. Not all. Something shifted in Quincy's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that matched her own. For a moment it seemed he might say more, might cross the narrow space between them. Instead, he looked at the sun's position. We should continue if we want to reach the homestead by midday, he said, his voice gentle but practical once more. As they resumed their journey, Katherine felt both relief and disappointment at the interrupted moment. Something was building between them, something neither was quite ready to name, but that grew stronger with each passing day. The familiar silhouette of the homestead appeared on the horizon just before noon. Katherine felt her breath catch at the sight of the small log cabin, the cottonwood tree with its 3 graves beneath, the abandoned fields beyond. It looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile against the vast prairie. They approached slowly, Quincy allowing her to set the pace. When they reached the yard, he dismounted and came to help her down from Willow, his hands steady at her waist. Take all the time you need, he said softly. I'll see to the horses. Katherine nodded gratefully and walked toward the graves. As Hollister had reported, wildflowers now bloomed across the mounds of earth-purple coneflowers, yellow blanket flower, and delicate white yarrow, creating a natural carpet that softened the stark reality of what lay beneath. She knelt beside them, placing the flowers she had brought from the ranch garden among the wild ones. I miss you, she whispered. Every day, but I'm finding my way. For a long while, Katherine simply sat there, memories washing over her father's deep laugh, her mother's hands guiding hers through the motions of kneading bread, little Ellie's excitement over a newly hatched chick. The grief was still there, but it had transformed somehow, becoming more a bittersweet ache than the raw agony of those first days. Eventually, she rose and walked to the cabin. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing the interior just as she had left it, neat but abandoned, the hearth cold, dust gathering on the simple furniture. Katherine moved through the room slowly, touching familiar objects, saying goodbye in her own way. In her parents' bedroom, she opened the small wooden chest that contained her mother's few treasures, a cameo brooch, a pair of lace gloves, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. These were things she hadn't taken in her hasty departure, things that now seemed precious beyond measure. Katherine was so absorbed in her memories that she didn't hear Quincy's approach until he spoke from the doorway. I hope I'm not intruding, he said quietly. She turned, clutching the bundle of letters. Not at all, I was just remembering, Quincy nodded, understanding in his eyes. Would you like to take anything back with us? There's room in the saddlebags. Katherine looked around the room, considering. Yes, I think I would, just a few things to remember them by. With Quincy's help, she gathered a small collection of items: the letters, the brooch, her father's pocket watch, Ellie's favorite book of fairy tales, and a patchwork quilt her mother had made from scraps of their old clothes. Each object held memories, connections to the family she had lost. As they prepared to leave, Katherine stood in the cabin doorway, taking one last look at the place that had been her home. I don't think I'll come back again, she said softly, at least not for a long while. Are you sure? Quincy asked. We could return whenever you wish. Katherine shook her head. No, it's time to look forward, not back. She turned to him. Thank you for bringing me here, for understanding why I needed to come. Quincy's gaze was warm. Of course. They rode away as the afternoon sun began its descent, the homestead growing smaller behind them until it disappeared from view. Katherine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders with each mile that passed, not the weight of grief, which would always be with her in some form, but the weight of uncertainty about her path forward. They made camp as dusk approached, finding a sheltered spot by a small stream. Quincy built a fire while Katherine arranged their simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. The night was mild, the sky above them vast and star-filled once darkness fell completely. Sitting across the fire from Quincy, Katherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. "I've made a decision," she said after they had eaten. Quincy looked up, his face illuminated by the firelight. "About my future, the homestead." She took a deep breath. "I want to sell it, use the money to build something new." "A wise choice, I think," Quincy said carefully. "Have you considered where you might go, what you might build?" Katherine met his gaze steadily. "I'd like to stay at the ranch if that's still possible, not as a charity case or even just an employee, but as someone with a purpose teaching the children, helping with the household and accounts. Contributing in a meaningful way." Something flickered in Quincy's eyes, hope, perhaps, or relief. "The ranch would be fortunate to have you in any capacity you choose, Katherine. You must know that by now." "And what about you?" she asked boldly, her heart racing. "Would you be fortunate to have me stay?" Quincy was silent for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Then he rose and came to sit beside her on the log she had chosen as a seat. "When you first came to the ranch," he said quietly, "I saw someone in need of shelter, of time to heal. I offered what I could because it was the right thing to do." He looked at her, his gaze intense in the firelight. "But somewhere along the way it became more than that. You became more than that." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "What did I become?" "Essential," Quincy said simply. "A presence I look forward to each morning, a voice I listen for, a smile that makes the day brighter when it appears." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. "I didn't expect to feel this way again, didn't think it was possible." Katherine turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. "I didn't either. After losing everyone, I thought that part of me was gone forever." "And now?" Quincy asked, his voice low. "Now I know better," Katherine said softly. "Now I understand that the heart can heal, can expand to hold both grief and joy, memory and hope." Quincy's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "Katherine," he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Yes," she whispered. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a meeting of souls as much as bodies. Quincy's lips were warm against hers, his hand cradling her face as if she were something infinitely precious. Katherine responded with a tentative eagerness that quickly grew more confident as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Quincy rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. Katherine smiled, her hand still clasped in his. "I've wanted you to." They sat together by the fire as the night deepened around them, talking of small things and large childhood memories, hopes for the future, favorite books, preferred seasons. It was the conversation of two people discovering each other, laying foundations for something that might endure. When weariness finally overcame them, they prepared their separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, propriety maintained despite the new understanding between them. As Katherine settled beneath her blanket, she looked across at Quincy, finding him watching her with an expression of wonder and contentment that matched her own feelings. "Good night, Quincy," she said softly. "Good night, Katherine," he replied. "Sleep well." Despite the hard ground beneath her and the strange surroundings, Katherine fell asleep more peacefully than she had in months. Her dreams filled not with the ghosts of her past, but with possibilities for her future. The journey back to the ranch the next day seemed to pass in a heartbeat, filled with easy conversation and shared observations about the landscape. Something had shifted between them, a new openness, a comfort with brief touches and lingering glances that spoke of their growing attachment. As they approached the ranch in the late afternoon, Katherine felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with the buildings ahead and everything to do with the man riding beside her. Whatever the future held, she knew with increasing certainty that she wanted to face it with Quincy Reed. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Katherine's life. Her teaching expanded to 3 mornings a week, with 8 children now attending regularly. The parents paid what they could, sometimes money, more often goods or services, and Katherine found deep satisfaction in watching her students' progress. She continued helping with the ranch accounts and household management, working alongside Quincy and Mrs. Winters in an arrangement that felt increasingly natural. Her riding improved steadily, and soon she was accompanying Quincy on regular tours of the ranch property, learning the boundaries and landmarks of the place she now thought of as home. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and shared values as much as the growing attraction between them. Quincy was unfailingly considerate, never pressing for more than Katherine was ready to give, though the heat in his gaze when they were alone together left no doubt about his feelings. By mid-July, their attachment was common knowledge around the ranch, accepted with knowing smiles and occasional good-natured teasing from the hands. Mrs. Winters, initially protective and somewhat skeptical, had softened considerably, treating Katherine more like a daughter than an employee or guest. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after dinner, Quincy reached for Katherine's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "A dangerous pastime," Katherine teased, earning a smile from him. "Perhaps." His expression grew serious. "I received an offer on your homestead today," Katherine straightened, surprised. "Already, you only spoke to the land agent last week." "Apparently, there's a family from Ohio looking to settle in the area. They've been staying in town while searching for suitable property." Quincy handed her a folded paper. "The offer is fair, I believe, but the decision is yours entirely." Katherine opened the document, scanning the formal language until she found the amount being offered. It was indeed fair, more than fair, in fact, enough to give her true independence if she wished it. "What do you think?" she asked, looking up at Quincy. His expression was carefully neutral. "As I said, the decision is yours. The money would allow you options. You could start a business in town, perhaps, or even travel east if you wished." Katherine heard the unspoken question in his words. "And if I wish to stay here," Quincy's hand tightened slightly around hers. "Then you would always be welcome, in whatever capacity you chose." There was something in his tone that made Katherine's heart race. "What capacity might that be, Mr. Reed?" Quincy's smile was gentle, but his eyes were serious. "I had thought to wait longer before asking, to give you more time to be certain of your own mind, but perhaps it's better to be clear." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Katherine Blackwell. These past months have shown me that life can begin again, that happiness is still possible even after great loss. If you feel the same, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Though she had begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it still took Katherine's breath away. "Quincy, you needn't answer now," he said quickly. "Take all the time you need. I know it's been a short acquaintance by conventional standards and your grief is still fresh. If you're not ready," Katherine leaned forward and silenced him with a kiss, brief but fervent. "Yes," she said simply when they parted. Quincy looked momentarily stunned. Yes, I'll marry you." Katherine's smile felt as though it might split her face. "I love you too, Quincy Reed. I wasn't looking for love when I came here. I was barely looking for survival. But you gave me a place at your table when I had nothing, and somewhere along the way, you also gave me your heart." The joy that transformed Quincy's face was something Katherine knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I don't have a ring yet," he murmured against her hair. "I'll ride into town tomorrow." Katherine laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I don't need a ring, I just need you." But Quincy was determined to do things properly. The next day, he returned from town with not only a ring, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond, but also the pastor, who agreed to publish the bands for the next 3 Sundays. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and surrounding community. Mrs. Winters, after a moment of stunned silence, embraced Katherine with tears in her eyes, declaring it was about time Mr. Reed found happiness again. The ranch hands organized an impromptu celebration, complete with music, dancing, and more food than Katherine had seen in one place since before the sickness took her family. As summer gave way to early autumn, wedding preparations became the central focus of ranch life. Katherine sold her homestead to the family from Ohio, using some of the money to order a wedding dress from St. Louis and setting the rest aside for the future. She continued teaching, now with the prospect of establishing a permanent school on ranch property after the wedding. The wedding day itself dawned clear and cool in late September, a perfect day for new beginnings. Katherine stood in her bedroom, now filled with flowers from the ranch garden, as Mrs. Winters helped her into the wedding dress that had arrived just days before. The gown was simpler than current fashion, dictated a cream-colored silk with modest lace trim that suited Katherine's practical nature while still marking the occasion as special. "You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Winters said, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers that crowned Katherine's dark hair. "Like you were made for this day." Katherine smiled at her reflection in the mirror, scarcely recognizing the confident, glowing woman who looked back at her. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "When I buried my mother just 5 months ago, I thought my life was over, and now it's just beginning," Mrs. Winters finished for her. "That's the way of life, child, endings and beginnings all mixed together." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mr. Hollister, looking uncomfortable but proud in his Sunday best. "It's time, Miss Blackwell," he said. "Everyone's waiting." In the absence of her father, Katherine had asked the foreman to escort her to the small arbor that had been constructed in the garden for the ceremony. Hollister had accepted with gruff emotion, clearly touched by the request. "You look mighty fine," he told her now, offering his arm. "Mr. Reed is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Katherine replied, taking his arm with a steady hand. The garden had been transformed for the occasion. Rows of chairs faced the flower-covered arbor, filled with ranch hands and their families, neighbors from surrounding properties, and townsfolk who had come to witness the union. At the altar stood the pastor and Quincy, the latter looking more handsome than Katherine had ever seen him in a new black suit and crisp white shirt. When their eyes met as she began her walk down the makeshift aisle, the love in Quincy's gaze was so palpable that Katherine felt it like a physical touch. Everything else faded: the murmurs of approval from the guests, the gentle music provided by one of the hands with a fiddle, even Mr. Hollister's steady presence beside her. There was only Quincy, waiting for her with a smile that held all the promises she could ever want. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the autumn air. When Quincy slipped the gold band onto her finger beside the engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Katherine's own voice trembled slightly as she placed a matching band on his finger, the physical symbol of their commitment making everything suddenly, wonderfully real. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Quincy's kiss was gentle but thorough, drawing a cheer from the assembled guests that made Katherine blush when they finally parted. Hand in hand, they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Reed, ready to begin their life together. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and drink flowing freely, music and dancing, and congratulations from everyone present. Katherine found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, her cheeks hurting from smiling, her heart full to bursting with joy. When she finally had a moment alone with Quincy, standing at the edge of the gathering as dusk fell, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "Happy Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her ear. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through Katherine. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted, leaning back into his embrace. "And you, beyond words," Quincy said, his voice husky with emotion. When you appeared on my horizon that day, standing beside those fresh graves, I thought only to offer temporary shelter to someone in need. I never imagined you would become my world." Katherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "Life takes us on unexpected journeys sometimes." "Indeed it does," Quincy agreed, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "And this particular journey is just beginning." As night fell fully, the newlyweds bid farewell to their guests and retired to the main house, to the master bedroom that Quincy had not used since Elizabeth's death, now refreshed with new linens and furniture arranged to Katherine's taste. The transition had been handled with sensitivity on both sides, acknowledging the past while embracing the future. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness, Katherine's head resting on Quincy's chest, she found herself thinking of the strange path that had led her here, of sickness and loss, of a chance encounter on the prairie, of a simple offer of hospitality that had changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Quincy asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Katherine smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking about how life can change in an instant, how the words 'there's room at my table' can lead to 'I do.'" Quincy's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "Best invitation I ever extended. Best one I ever accepted," Katherine replied, lifting her head to find his lips in the darkness. As winter settled over the prairie, Reed Ranch thrived under the care of its expanded household. The small school Katherine had begun now occupied a proper building, constructed by the ranch hands and the fathers of her students during the late autumn. 12 children attended regularly, their education supplemented by books Quincy ordered from back east and materials Katherine created herself. The ranch accounts, once in disarray, were now meticulously organized under Katherine's management. She had discovered a talent for business that complemented Quincy's practical knowledge of ranching, and together they made decisions that improved the ranch's profitability while maintaining its reputation for fair dealing. Mrs. Winters remained with them, her role shifting from housekeeper to something more akin to family. She doted on the couple in her own gruff way, especially as Katherine's waistline began to expand with evidence of new life, a development announced at Christmas to general celebration. "A spring baby," Quincy had said, his hand gentle on Katherine's still flat stomach, his eyes filled with wonder. "A new beginning." Katherine had covered his hand with her own, thinking of the family she had lost and the family she was building. "Life continues," she said softly. "Even after the greatest sorrows." As April approached, bringing the anniversary of her family's deaths but also the promise of new life, Katherine often thought about the strange symmetry of existence, how endings and beginnings intertwined, how loss and love could coexist in the same heart. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch enjoying the mild spring air, her hand resting on her now prominent belly, Quincy joined her, pulling his chair close to hers. "I was thinking," he said, taking her free hand in his. "About names," Katherine smiled. "Were you now, and what were you thinking?" "If it's a girl," Quincy said carefully, "perhaps Elizabeth after my first wife and Eleanor after your sister." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "Elizabeth Eleanor Reed," she said, testing the name. "It's beautiful." "And if it's a boy," Quincy continued, "perhaps James after your father." "And Thomas after mine. James Thomas Reed," Katherine nodded. "Strong names for a strong boy." Quincy's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Is that all right, naming our child after those we've lost?" Katherine leaned over to kiss him gently. "It's perfect. A way of honoring the past while embracing the future, of remembering that love never truly ends, it just changes form." Quincy's hand moved to her stomach, his expression softening as he felt the baby move beneath his palm. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted. "A family, hope, joy." "Nor did I," Katherine said softly. "When I stood by those 3 graves, I thought my life was over, and then a stranger rode up and said, 'There's room at my table,'" Quincy finished with a smile. "Little did you know what you were getting yourself into," Katherine teased. Quincy leaned forward to kiss her, his lips warm and familiar against hers. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured, "inviting you in." As they sat together in the lengthening spring twilight, Katherine thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the tragedies and blessings, the losses and gains. Life on the frontier was never easy, never certain. But with Quincy beside her, with the child growing beneath her heart, with the community they had built around them, Katherine knew she had found something precious beyond measure, not just a place at the table, but a home. Not just survival, but life in all its fullness. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Katherine Reed closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had led her here to this man, this ranch, this life that had blossomed from the ashes of her greatest sorrow.